Before I begin, I would want to kind of take this myth out and myth away that there's something fundamentally wrong with conflict. As kids, we are really told that conflict is something which should be avoided, and it's something really bad, and good people do not get into conflict. And I feel that that's something which is not true. I feel conflict is very normal, it's very natural, it's very healthy. It could be a great way of connecting with your partner in terms of opening up and building intimacy. However, what is detrimental to the relationship and the challenge which we face is conflict resolution. So two people living together who grew up in different houses are now put together and with two different families, and now they are raising and co-parenting kids and making decisions day in and day out. Conflict is bound to happen. But how we manage these conflicts is something which I would want to kind of touch upon and give some strategies. And look, this is a fairly vast topic, so I don't expect the next 30 minutes or so to kind of give you all the solutions in terms of solution in terms of managing all the conflict, but it will at least give you. My intention is to give you some conversation starters with your partner, and kind of have that conversation regarding how they are managing conflict as a couple. So my first strategy, or so to say, the first thing I really emphasize upon is boundaries. And when I work with my clients also, and I say, have you discussed your boundaries with your husband or with your wife? The first question is, what do you mean by boundaries between a couple? Like, we're married, and boundaries are for the outsiders, right? And that's the confusion which we feel, that like boundaries are barriers. However, very simply put, what are boundaries? So boundaries is basically like the easiest definition I can think of boundaries is what's okay, what's not okay. And the role of boundaries is basically to protect us. And when we feel protected, then we feel safe, and then we are able to actually connect better with our partner, right? So the idea of boundaries is not just to protect, but also to help us connect with our partner. And boundaries could revolve around a lot of conversations, and they're usually negotiated between the couple, right? So, for example, if we are having an argument, what kind of a language can we use? Is abusive language okay? What kind of a tone is okay? What kind of a pitch is okay? There's always conversations about confidentiality. So, for example, if a couple is having a conflict, what's the unspoken and spoken rule about confidentiality? Can that information be shared with the in-laws? And that's something which is very, very common, and it's a very common breach of boundaries where, for example, the mother-in-law or the father-in-law is told about a conversation which happened between the couple, right? So confidentiality, rules about having discussions and arguments in front of kids, what are the boundaries revolving around that? And something which is also which is sad but true is about use of hands. So, for example, is pushing okay? Is throwing a pillow okay, but something which breaks not okay? Like, how do you have this discussion and put down certain rules forward? I had a female client of mine, and she said, well, she could hit her husband because she is a female, and it won't hurt her husband. Like, it wouldn't physically hurt the husband because she doesn't have as much strength. And my question to her was that is that a boundary which you have agreed upon? Because that just to me seemed like a boundary violation as well, right? So the idea is that as a couple, you talk about your boundaries and discuss and rediscuss what's okay, what's not okay. And a tip I would want to give when we are having arguments and discussion is to avoid generalizations. That means that you always do this or you never do this. Words like always and never are something which kind of make the other persons feel attacked. And when we feel attacked, our defense mechanisms get up, our guard comes up, and we're not able to connect. So that's something which I would want to bring to my second point about defense mechanisms, about our identifying our own patterns, right? So the way it works is, so the first step was boundaries. Boundaries help us to protect us and help us connect with our partner better. The second is self-work. So what I've noticed is, and that happens with me as well, that so there are three entities in the relationship, right? So it's the husband, the wife, and the relationship, right? And each partner's main concern usually happens to be to fix their partner, right? So they would want to do things. So for example, a husband would say that this is wrong with my wife, and the wife would say that our relationship would be perfect if my husband can do this things. We're trying to fix each other out, whereas the real work has to happen on the self, right? So this is where, through reflection, through introspection, through really any activity, meditation, going through a therapist, whatever helps us to kind of get to understand ourselves better and understand our patterns better would allow us to bring our best self, so to say, in that relationship, right? So what are patterns? So let's talk a little bit about patterns, right? So patterns are usually the conditioning which we receive as kids, through the spoken and unspoken messages, right? It's basically the language which we learn, through which kids learn how to get love of their parents. It's the currency of getting love. So, for example, if a boy is growing up in a household where it's been taught that boys don't cry, so the message which the son or the child would get is that, okay, if I show my weakness, if I show my vulnerability, if I show my emotion, and if I cry, God forbid, I'm defected and people would not love me, and that's something which is something I would learn to kind of bottle up my emotions. Similarly, if you take a very common example of the good girl concept, right? Like, what do good girls do? They take care of everyone. They're so responsible. They take, they put their parents' wishes and their dreams above their own dreams and all those kind of things, right? So imagine now this good girl gets married to the guy whose emotions are completely blocked and he's extremely critical of himself. So let's say he's a perfectionist and the girl is a pleaser, and she gets her validation by helping and pleasing the husband. Now the husband is already a very critical person. He's a perfectionist, so he's never happy, right? So what's happening is that the wife continues to please the husband to get validation. She gets completely depleted, and the husband is still not happy because he's a critical man. That's how he's been raised, and then she starts resenting him. She starts feeling like a victim. She starts feeling like someone who's never appreciated, and that's how the cycle continues, right? So when I talk about self-work, the self-work would be to actually identify what are my patterns like perfectionism. Am I the responsible one? I'm the pleaser. I'm the victim. I'm the rescuer. And when you're able to identify those patterns, which does require a lot of courage, because we definitely don't want to see ourselves, the dark side of ourselves. That's in a way, our dark side, and then we can actually start working on the improvement part, like the healing part, the relationship part, right? So let me give you an example which we use, which is very common in relationships, what we call projection. Now, projection is a defense mechanism. And what exactly is projection? Projection is that if I have an insecurity and I don't want to kind of face that insecurity, I kind of project this insecurity in my partner, and kind of make them something wrong with them. So this male client comes to me and tells me that, Muzaffar, my partner is so needy. And I'm like, okay, what makes them so needy? And he's like, well, she's always complaining about how I'm not spending time with her, and I'm always working, and I'm not available for her. So then when we explore his relationship with work, it turns out that he is always stressed about his work, and he's always worried that he will not get promoted, he will not meet his goals, his boss will reprimand him, and all those kind of things. So the husband, my client here in this case, has a very insecure relationship with his work. And he's not able to identify this insecurity, that he is feeling insecure about his work. So what he's doing is that he is projecting this insecurity and instead facing his own insecurity, telling that his wife is the one who's got issues and she's the needy one, right? So that's how this projection works, right? So let's see if as a couple we have worked together, that we are able to identify what our insecurities are. We're able to identify what is my baggage and what is your baggage, because we do tend to bring both our baggages into the relationship, right? And that gets very messy. So what's the next step then, right? So the next step is being vulnerable, having honest, real conversations, authentic conversations, and the best way to go about this is connecting through empathy. Now, empathy is one of my favorite topics, and it's something which I feel is very much misunderstood, right? So let's take the same example of this guy who is, going through, takes all his validation out of his work. He feels insecure about his work. And here, because of lockdown, he's not going to the office. He's having an identity crisis, and he's finding that very difficult to deal with, right? And he needs to have this vulnerable conversation with his wife. And now you'd say that, and then let's assume that his wife is a homemaker, so she doesn't work. So if she hasn't been through the experience of working, she hasn't been through the experience of what exactly work stress, office stress mean like. So how can she relate? So the idea is not about having the same experience. The idea is to connect to the underlying emotion behind this experience. So, for example, if he's feeling scared and anxious and nervous, I'm sure the wife has also had an opportunity and experience in her life is she has felt nervous, scared, and anxious, right? So the empathy in this thing would be connecting to that underlying emotion. And that's what makes empathy so hard, because to empathize with someone, we need to be able to dig in our own self and really connect with our difficult emotion, and through that emotion we connect with our partner, right? And it's very easy to misunderstand empathy with sympathy, right? So for example, let's say the husband comes to her and tells her that, I'm going through so much and I'm suffering because there is this pain which I'm feeling and I'm scared and all those kind of things, right? So if the wife turns around and say, oh, poor you, and I feel so bad for you, so that's sympathy. And no one, and even though we might feel that sympathy is something good, no, sympathy disconnects us. Sympathy makes the other person go in their shell. So sympathy is basically feeling the pain for someone, and empathy is feeling the pain with someone. And to build connection, we need to have empathy and not sympathy, right? So let's say, what could the wife do instead to show empathy rather than showing sympathy? She could listen. And I think one of the harder things which I have noticed in relationships is the ability to listen, because we are very hardwired to give solutions. We are very hardwired to kind of take the pain away from our partner, and that's what we do. This whole mindset of, my husband's problem is my problem. It's a very unhealthy mindset. I'll tell you why. Because the husband has a problem, and now the wife also makes it her problem as well. So now both husband and wife both have the same problem, and it's not the most healthy way of dealing with problems. And that's how enmeshment happens. So the idea is just to be able to listen without providing solutions. I know a lot of us tend to have this tendency that, we get validation from providing solution. We get validation by providing the solution to our partner, because that makes us feel important, makes us feel needed. And what happens is that when our partner does not listen to our solution, we feel rejected. And then it almost becomes like our own victim cycle that, oh, he doesn't listen to me or she doesn't listen to me and things, right? So that's where I think the miscommunication could happen, that, look, we're not trying to solve the problems. We're not trying to give the solution. We're just trying to listen and stay with that feeling. And to be honest, that's where the hard part is, because staying with that feeling is hard, and that's where intimacy builds, and that's where the connection brings, right? So I think my point here is that we are connecting through empathy here, and we're doing our own work, and we are meeting it at a point where we can both kind of contribute and show curiosity to each other. By when I say curiosity, I would mean like asking questions like, tell me more, how can I help you, and as opposed to saying that this is what you should do. Or I've also noticed sometimes one partner takes the problem and actually makes it their own problem so much that the focus then goes from, so let's say the husband who was worried about his work, the wife starts worrying about the financial situation of the family and everything. So the focus from the husband goes to the wife here, and that's also breaking empathy here, and it's an empathy miss, right? So, okay, so now we've talked about boundaries. We've talked about how boundaries are important to create safe spaces. When we do feel safe, we are able to let go of our guard. We are able to not bring our defense mechanisms into play all the time in the relationship dynamics, and we are connecting through empathy, right? So it sounds very simple, but to be honest, it isn't. It is a work in progress, and despite all what we might be going through and all our self-work, we will slip again and again, and we will make mistakes. And what do we do when we make mistakes? We say sorry, we apologize. But I would want to kind of talk about how sometimes apology is so misunderstood. When we apologize, it's a very conditional apology. And that's not what we're looking for, right? So, for example, like last week, I was having a stressful day, and my wife comes in, and I'm waiting for an opportunity for her to slip, and for me to kind of attack by saying something hurtful, which kind of takes my pain away and moves on to her pain, right? And that's what happened, and I kind of realized that, okay, I have made a mistake. So the idea is that when I go and say sorry, I'm not going to say, I'm sorry if I hurt you. No, I'm sorry I hurt you. There's no if. So that's one. I'm sorry I hurt you, but I was so stressed. No, there's no but. We don't need to use the word but. I am sorry I hurt you. It requires for us to take it requires courage. It requires us to be vulnerable, but it also means that when we're saying sorry, we're taking responsibility, and that's what we need to kind of do when we're apologizing. We're taking responsibility, and we are not attaching an expectation to the outcome. So my wife, I turn around and might not say it's okay. At that time, she might say, I need some more time to process what happened. She could say things like, and she doesn't have to say, I'm sorry. Now, that's a very, ego-driven apology when we say, I'm sorry, not say, I'm sorry. And you'd be surprised. It seems like a very childish behavior. And a lot of times when we are hurt and in a conflict situation, we are acting from a place of a wounded child. So basically, we might expect them to. We might say sorry to hear sorry back, and it sounds good for the ego, but that's not what a real apology would look like, right? So yes, you would make mistakes. Apologize, right? So, and when you say apologize, you just say, I'm sorry I hurt you, and then that's it about it. You've done your work. Give them space to process, give them that time to kind of come back to you, rather than saying, okay, now be fine right away, because that's my need. That's not her need at that time, right? So let's recap again. So we've talked about boundaries, how it helps to create a safe environment in a couple. We've talked about working on yourself and then connecting through empathy. And then whenever you slip, apologize, and apologize the right way, right? So now, before we kind of wrap up, this discussion, let me kind of talk a little bit more about what to do as a couple when you're not having a conflict. And I think that's a great time to what I call about building in emotional capital, because the more emotional capital we have as a couple, the more that could come in handy during a difficult time when the relationship is going through. And what is emotional capital? Emotional capital is built through doing shared activities, is having common goals, having some sort of playfulness, some sort of using humor, and the best easiest and the hardest way to build emotional capital is appreciate. I mean, it's one of the most underrated and underutilized tools which we use, in when it comes to to build emotional capital, appreciation. And I, for example, in our culture, a lot of times we feel that if we're not complaining, that means we're appreciating, and that's something which is so funny, because appreciation is something which is a basic human need from since childhood, and we as kids we want to be appreciated, and then when we grow and we come into a marriage, we need appreciation as well, right? So to show appreciation, one of my favorite works is The Five Love Languages. If you haven't seen it, it's an amazing book by Gary Chapman, and it's actually got a very nice quiz online as well. And the whole concept is that humans have different love languages. So, for example, my love language is affirmation. So, for me to be appreciated, I need to hear from my wife for her to verbally appreciate me and give me that affirmation. Her love language is a physical touch, so she needs a hug or like a stroke on the head or something like that, to be able to show that I'm appreciating her. Then there is acts of service, there is gifts. So there's five languages, and it's very important because I might feel that if I'm affirming my wife, I feel that I'm affirming her, and that means that she should be feeling appreciated. But no, she has a different language, and because of the different language, she needs to be appreciated in her language. And that's a very common mistake, which we do make as a couple, because we feel we're doing our part, but it's as humans, we're wired differently as well. So someone is asking if you could share the name of the author. It's Gary Chapman, and there's a website. So I'll just put it up there on the link after this call as well. It's called Five Love Languages, basically. So I think that's pretty much about it. This is a process which is a work in progress. It requires a lot of self-compassion. It requires, and why I say self-compassion is because you cannot have your own resources depleted and go out and help your partner. You first need to help yourself to be able to. And I know our conditioning is usually done to kind of help others before you help yourself. But I cannot emphasize the fact that you need to have your own bucket full to be able to go and help your partner. I guess that's pretty much what I had to say. Before I wrap up, I would want to read a passage from Jeff Brown, which really resonated with me, and I would love to share it with you. So the passage goes like this: Love is the easy part. Relationship is the challenge. But then you knew that. In the old days, they really believed that finding love was the hard part. And then they were startled when they found it and things got difficult. But now we are coming to understand that it is often quite the opposite. That working through the unresolved feelings and issues that get in the way of love is the hard part. It is, but there's something quite profound in that. And if we can stay together and see the process through, something happens to our understanding of love. No longer a projected imagining, we come to see it in a far more substantial light. What we once called love was just the beginning. What comes later, after years of watching each other bravely confront the challenges, is the real thing. Where before a flight of fancy, it now has roots everywhere. Thank you everyone for logging in. I really enjoyed having this conversation.